The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Westfield University's mathematics building, casting long rectangles of light across the worn linoleum floor. Mei Lin adjusted her glasses and clutched her second-hand textbook closer to her chest as she navigated the crowded hallway. Unlike the other students who moved in laughing clusters, she walked alone, her footsteps quick and purposeful. Mei had learned early in life that being invisible had its advantages. The daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a small grocery store on the edge of town, she had grown up watching her parents work 16-hour days, their hands calloused from labor but their spirits unbroken. They had sacrificed everything to send her to college, and she wouldn't waste a single opportunity. Advanced theoretical mathematics with Professor Harrington starts in 5 minutes, she whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed when nervous. The class was notoriously difficult, rumored to be the course that separated the truly brilliant from the merely hard-working. As Mei entered the lecture hall, the familiar scene unfolded. Groups of young men in expensive sweaters clustered together, their voices confident and loud as they compared summer internships at prestigious tech companies. The same guys who borrowed her notes but never remembered her name at campus parties. She slipped into a seat in the back row, arranging her pens in perfect alignment. Blue for definitions, black for examples, red for important theorems. "Is this seat taken?" A voice interrupted her ritual. Mei looked up to see Zach Thompson, the unofficial star of the mathematics department. With his perfectly styled hair and designer glasses, he was the type of student who seemed to absorb complex theorems through osmosis while the rest struggled for hours. "No," she said quietly. "Great," Zach replied, but instead of sitting down, he grabbed the chair and dragged it toward his friends in the front row. "We need one more seat for Tyler." Mei pretended to be busy organizing her notebook, but her cheeks burned. This was nothing new. 3 years at Westfield, and she remained on the outside looking in. She didn't have the right clothes or the right background or even the right way of speaking to fit in. Her accent, though slight, became more pronounced when she was called on in class, making her painfully self-conscious. Professor Harrington entered the room precisely at 9 a.m., his tweed jacket and silver hair giving him the appearance of a stereotypical academic. The chatter died down immediately. No one risked getting on his bad side. "Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Mathematics," he announced, his voice filling the room without effort. "Look to your left, look to your right. Statistically speaking, one of you won't make it to the final exam." The students shifted uncomfortably, except for Mei. She had heard versions of this speech before in every difficult class she'd taken. The warnings never frightened her, they only strengthened her resolve. "This semester, we'll be exploring mathematical concepts that push the boundaries of human understanding," Professor Harrington continued. "I expect nothing less than excellence." As he began writing a complex equation on the board, Mei noticed she was the only woman in the room of 37 students. It wasn't unusual in her advanced math courses, but the realization still landed with a dull thud in her stomach, another space where she would have to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. The first hour of the lecture passed in a blur of symbols and formulas. Mei's hand cramped from taking notes, but she didn't stop. Every definition, every example, every aside from Professor Harrington found its way into her notebook in neat, precise handwriting. When the professor posed a question about vector spaces that silenced the room, Mei knew the answer. Her hand twitched, wanting to rise, but past experience held it firmly in her lap. The last time she'd answered a question correctly, a boy behind her had whispered, "Of course the robot knows," loud enough for those nearby to snicker. "No volunteers?" Professor Harrington's eyebrows rose in disappointment. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your understanding?" Zach straightened in his chair, confidence radiating from him despite his obvious lack of preparation. "Well, sir, I believe it has something to do with linear independence." As he fumbled through an incomplete answer, Mei silently recited the correct response in her head, word for word from the textbook she'd read 3 times over the summer. After class, students gathered in the hallway, already forming study groups. Mei packed her bag methodically, giving them time to disperse before she left. She had learned that quick exits minimized uncomfortable interactions. "Hey," a voice said beside her. It belonged to Lee Park, a quiet exchange student who'd arrived last semester. "Your notes are really good. I saw you writing everything down." "Thank you." May replied, surprised by the unexpected conversation. I'm struggling a bit with the concepts. English isn't my first language, and Professor Harrington speaks so fast, Lee admitted. Would you mind if we studied together sometime? Before May could answer, Zach appeared, slinging an arm around Lee's shoulders. Park, we're heading to the Commons to go over the first chapter. You coming? Lee glanced at May, then back to Zach. Actually, I was just... Come on. Tyler figured out a shortcut for those integration problems, Zach interrupted, already pulling Lee away. See you around, he added to May as an afterthought, not even looking in her direction. See you, May said quietly to their retreating backs. The mathematics building emptied quickly after morning classes. May lingered in the now quiet hallway, studying the faded photographs of past department chairs and distinguished alumni that lined the walls. Row after row of serious-faced men stared back at her, their achievements listed in small plaques beneath their portraits. She stood before the most recent addition, a young man who had won the prestigious Fields Medal for solving a famous topology problem. His smile seemed to mock her, as if to say, "This could never be you. They're quite intimidating, aren't they?" May turned to find Professor Wong, one of the few female professors in the department, examining the wall of photographs beside her. Yes, May admitted. Very accomplished. And very male, Professor Wong added with a wry smile. When I was a student, these faces used to make me feel like I didn't belong. She tapped the glass covering one particularly stern portrait. But then I realized something important. What's that? May asked. That mathematics doesn't care who solves its puzzles. Numbers don't know gender or background or social status. They only respond to persistence and insight. Professor Wong looked directly at May. I've noticed your work, Ms. Lin. You have both. Warmth spread through May's chest at the unexpected recognition. Thank you, Professor. My office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 4, Professor Wong said. Stop by if you ever want to discuss concepts beyond the curriculum. Or anything else, she added before continuing down the hallway. May watched her go, feeling slightly lighter than before. Perhaps she wasn't as invisible as she thought. That evening in her small off-campus apartment, May prepared a simple dinner of rice and vegetables while reviewing her notes from the day. The apartment was sparsely furnished, just a bed, a desk piled high with textbooks, and a small table. On the wall hung a single photograph of her parents standing proudly in front of their grocery store, their smiles wide despite the visible exhaustion in their eyes. I'm doing well, Mama, she said to the photograph as she had done every night since moving away from home. The classes are hard, but I understand everything so far. She didn't mention the loneliness or the way some classmates looked through her rather than at her. Her parents had enough burdens without carrying her social struggles, too. After dinner, May spread her work across the desk and lost herself in the elegant world of mathematical proofs. Here, in the realm of numbers and symbols, everything made sense. There were clear rules, logical progressions, and definitive answers. Unlike people, mathematics never rejected you because of where you came from or how you dressed. Hours passed as she worked through problem after problem, going far beyond the assigned homework. When she finally looked up, it was past midnight. Her back ached from hunching over her desk, but her mind felt alive with connections and possibilities. As she prepared for bed, May caught her reflection in the small bathroom mirror, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Wearing the same faded sweater she'd had since high school. Nothing like the confident, well-dressed students who dominated class discussions. It doesn't matter, she told her reflection firmly. Your work is what counts. She thought of the wall of photographs at the university. All those accomplished men had faced their own challenges. And now Professor Wong was there too, proof that the landscape could change. That night, May dreamed of equations floating in the air around her, beautiful and complex. In the dream, she reached out and rearranged them with her fingers, solving impossible problems with elegant simplicity. And when she turned around, she saw her own photograph hanging on that wall of distinction, her name engraved on a small golden plaque. The next morning, as she walked to class with renewed determination, May didn't notice the way the early sunlight made her dark eyes shine with intelligence and purpose. She didn't see how her quiet confidence set her apart from the loudly insecure students around her. She only felt the weight of her textbooks and the lightness of knowing exactly where she was headed, even if the path there was lined with obstacles. What Maylene couldn't yet see was that being underestimated would turn out to be her greatest advantage. The classroom buzzed with nervous energy as students filed in for Professor Harrington's advanced theoretical mathematics class. 2 weeks had passed since the semester began, and already 4 students had dropped out, unable to keep up with the relentless pace. May slipped into her usual seat in the back row, carefully arranging her color-coded notebooks and freshly sharpened pencils. She had spent the weekend solving extra problems from the textbook's appendix. The ones Professor Harrington had offhandedly mentioned were too advanced for this course. The concepts had kept her awake until 3 a.m., but the satisfaction of finding solutions made the lack of sleep worthwhile. Mathematics had always been her refuge, a place where clarity existed in a world that often made little sense to her. "Settle down, everyone," Professor Harrington called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. Today he looked particularly serious, almost excited in a way that made the students exchange uneasy glances. "I have something special prepared for today's class." May straightened in her seat. Special usually meant difficult, and difficult meant an opportunity to prove herself. Professor Harrington turned to the whiteboard and began writing a complex equation that sprawled across the entire surface. His chalk moved swiftly, filling the board with symbols, Greek letters, and numbers. When he finally stepped back, the room had fallen completely silent. "This," he announced with dramatic flair, "is what mathematicians call the sentinel problem. It was first proposed in 1982 and has remained unsolved for over 4 decades. A low whistle came from the front row where Zach Thompson sat. "That looks impossible," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not impossible, Mr. Thompson, just incredibly difficult." Professor Harrington smiled, but there was something predatory in his expression. "This problem has broken careers and driven brilliant minds to frustration. It combines elements of non-Euclidean geometry, differential equations, and number theory in ways that have proven resistant to conventional approaches." May studied the equation, her mind already breaking it down into components, searching for patterns and possible entry points. There was something hauntingly beautiful about its complexity. "I've decided to make this your semester project," Professor Harrington continued, ignoring the collective groan from the class. "Or 30% of your final grade. You may work in groups or individually. You have until the end of the semester to submit your best attempt at a solution." Tyler Bennett raised his hand. "Professor, you said it's unsolved. So how will you grade us?" "Excellent question, Mr. Bennett. I'll be evaluating your methodology, your creativity in approaching the problem, and how far you manage to progress. I don't expect anyone to actually solve it. That would be unreasonable." He laughed lightly. "But I do expect serious efforts." As Professor Harrington continued explaining the historical significance of the problem, May noticed something odd about one section of the equation. It reminded her of a pattern her grandmother had shown her years ago, during those precious summer visits to China. Her grandmother, who had never received formal education but possessed an intuitive brilliance for numbers, used to draw similar patterns in the dirt behind their small village home. Harmonies in chaos, her grandmother had called them in Mandarin. "The universe speaks through patterns if only we learn to listen." The memory was so vivid that for a moment, May could almost smell the jasmine that grew wild near her grandmother's house. "Ms. Lin, are you with us?" Professor Harrington's voice snapped her back to the present. "Yes, Professor," she answered quickly, heat rising to her cheeks as several students turned to look at her. "Good, because I was just saying that even attempting this problem will require absolute focus and dedication." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before moving on. "Class dismissed. I suggest you start forming your groups immediately." The room erupted into motion as students gathered their things, already calling out to friends and preferred study partners. May packed her bag slowly, copying down the entire problem before Professor Harrington could erase it from the board. "Hey, calculator girl," Zach's voice came from beside her desk. He stood with Tyler and a few others from their usual group. "Want to join our team? We could use someone to handle the grunt work." Calculator girl, the nickname they'd given her after she'd memorized a statistical table that everyone else had needed calculators for. They said it with a smile, but May heard the edge beneath the friendliness. "No thanks," she replied quietly. "I think I'll work alone." Zach raised an eyebrow. Suit yourself. But no one solved this thing working solo. He rejoined his friends, who were already heading for the campus coffee shop to begin strategizing. As the room emptied, May approached the board, studying the equation more closely. There was definitely something familiar about the pattern structure, something that tugged at distant memories. Thinking of tackling it alone, Professor Wong had entered the classroom and now stood watching May with interest. Yes, May admitted. I work better that way. Professor Wong nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the noise of too many voices can drown out the whispers of intuition. But don't hesitate to come to my office hours if you need guidance. Actually, Professor, May hesitated, then continued. Does this section remind you of anything in traditional Chinese mathematical systems? Something about it seems familiar to me. Professor Wong came closer, studying the section May pointed to. Interesting observation. Some of the oldest mathematical traditions did approach problems differently than Western methods. Your cultural background might give you a unique perspective. She smiled. Use every advantage you have, Ms. Lin. Mathematics doesn't care where insight comes from, only that it arrives. That evening, May's small apartment became a fortress of concentration. She taped large sheets of paper to her walls, copying the sentinel problem in the center of each one, then surrounding it with notes, questions, and possible approaches. She worked through dinner, forgetting to eat until her stomach complained loudly around midnight. As she finally prepared for bed, exhausted but mind still racing, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lee Park, the exchange student who had tried to speak with her earlier in the semester. Heard you're working alone on the sentinel problem. Brave. Can I ask why? May stared at the message, surprised that anyone had noticed or cared about her choice. After a moment's hesitation, she typed back. Sometimes it's easier to hear your own thoughts in silence. His reply came quickly. I understand. Good luck. If you ever want to compare notes, let me know. The message left a small warmth in her chest as she fell asleep, surrounded by equations that followed her into her dreams. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. During the day, May attended classes, worked her part-time job at the university library, and stole moments between responsibilities to jot down new ideas for approaching the problem. At night, she lost herself in mathematical exploration, trying approaches that grew increasingly unorthodox. One evening, video calling her parents as she did every Sunday, her mother noticed the papers covering every wall. May, you look tired. Are you sleeping enough? Her mother asked, concern creasing her face. I'm fine, Mama, just working on a big project. Her father leaned into the frame. Don't push yourself too hard. Your health is more important than any grade. I know, Baba, but this is special. How could she explain that this problem had become more than an assignment? It had become a conversation between her mind and the universe, between present and past. Every time she worked on it, she felt closer to her grandmother, as if the old woman's spirit guided her hand. Your grandmother would be proud, her mother said softly, as if reading her thoughts. She always said you had her gift for numbers. After ending the call, May returned to her work with renewed energy. That night, she made her first significant breakthrough, finding a way to reframe part of the problem using an approach inspired by ancient Chinese mathematical texts she'd found in the university's archives. The following day, as students gathered before class, May overheard Zach's group discussing their progress. We've been at this for 3 weeks and have nothing to show for it, Tyler complained, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. Professor Harrington said no one would actually solve it, another student reminded him. We just need to show good work. Speaking of which, Zach lowered his voice, but not enough. Has anyone seen Calculator Girl's work? Bet she's still on page 1. Laughter rippled through the group. Mee kept her eyes on her notebook, her fingers tightening around her pen. Let them laugh. Their mockery couldn't touch the pure joy she'd felt last night when equations had aligned in unexpected harmony. Professor Harrington entered, silencing the room with his presence. I hope you're all making progress on the sentinel problem. Remember, methodology matters more than results. His eyes swept the class. Would anyone like to share their approach so far? Zach's hand shot up. Our group is using a multi-pronged attack, sir. We've broken the problem into 5 components and assigned each to a team member based on their strengths. Efficient. Professor Harrington nodded approvingly. Anyone else? Several other groups described their strategies, each sounding more complex and collaborative than the last. May remained silent, protective of her unorthodox approach. As class ended, Professor Harrington announced, "Next week, I'll be randomly selecting students to present their current progress. Be prepared." The following Monday, May arrived early to find a notice on the classroom door. Professor Harrington was ill and class was canceled. A note instructed students to use the time to work on their projects and be ready to present during the next session. As disappointed students dispersed, Lee approached May. "Want to grab coffee? We could talk about non-math things for once." May hesitated, then nodded. She had been working non-stop for weeks. Perhaps a short break would help clear her mind. At the campus coffee shop, Lee proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, asking about her family and sharing stories of his home and soul. For the first time in months, May found herself laughing. The weight of the sentinel problem temporarily lifted from her shoulders. "You know," Lee said as they finished their drinks, "I've watched how the others treat you. It's not right." May shrugged. "I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're the smartest person in that class. Even Professor Harrington sees it, though he'd never admit it." May felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you." As they walked back across campus, Lee asked, "How's your approach to the problem going?" "Really?" May considered the question. "I think I might be onto something. But it's different. Not the kind of approach they teach here." Lee smiled. "Those are usually the approaches that change everything." That night, as rain tapped against her window, May had a dream about her grandmother showing her patterns in falling raindrops. She woke suddenly at 3 a.m. with absolute clarity about the next step in her solution. Working feverishly until dawn, she restructured her entire approach, following an intuition that felt ancient and new all at once. By the time sunlight filtered through her curtains, May stood back from her wall of papers, heart pounding. What had seemed impossible now appeared within reach. The sentinel problem was opening itself to her, not through brute force, but through harmony, finding the rhythm within chaos, just as her grandmother had taught her. As she prepared for class, exhausted but exhilarated, May knew something had changed. Whether or not she fully solved the problem, she had found her own voice in the language of mathematics. And for the first time since arriving at Westfield University, she felt like she belonged, not because others accepted her, but because she had accepted herself. Morning light streamed through the windows of the mathematics building as students gathered for Professor Harrington's class. The atmosphere was tense. Today was presentation day. After weeks of wrestling with the sentinel problem, everyone would share their progress or lack thereof. May arrived early, dark circles under her eyes testifying to another night of minimal sleep. Her notebook contained something precious, a solution that had come to her in the early hours of the morning, a revelation so clear it had jolted her awake. She'd spent the rest of the night checking and rechecking her work, hardly daring to believe what she'd found. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lee said, sliding into the seat next to her. In the weeks since their coffee shop conversation, he'd taken to sitting near her during class, a small act of solidarity that hadn't gone unnoticed by others. "Not a ghost," May replied softly. "Maybe an answer." Lee's eyes widened. "To the whole thing? The sentinel problem?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, not wanting to draw attention. "I think so. It came to me last night, a different way of looking at it." "That's," Lee began, but was interrupted as Professor Harrington strode into the room, recovered from his illness and looking particularly energetic. "Good morning, mathematicians," he announced, surveying the tired faces before him. "Today we'll see how you're all progressing with our little challenge. Who would like to begin?" Predictably, Zach's hand shot up first. He and his group had prepared a polished presentation, complete with digital slides showing their methodical approach to breaking down the problem. "As you can see, Professor, we've made significant progress on sections 2 and 4, Zach concluded after a 10-minute explanation. "We believe we're on track to provide a partial solution by the deadline." Professor Harrington nodded approvingly. "Excellent teamwork, though I notice your approach is firmly rooted in conventional methods. Anyone taking a more creative angle?" Several other groups presented, each showing varying degrees of progress. Some had clever insights on specific portions of the problem, while others were clearly struggling. As the presentations continued, May's heart raced. Should she share what she'd discovered? Her solution was so unorthodox, so different from the approaches being discussed, that she feared ridicule if she'd made a mistake. Ms. Lin. Professor Harrington's voice cut through her thoughts. You're working alone, correct? Would you care to share your progress? All eyes turned to her. May felt her throat tighten. Yes, I've been working on it, she managed, and Professor Harrington prompted, an eyebrow raised. I've been exploring connections to ancient Chinese mathematical traditions. She began cautiously, particularly cyclical pattern recognition techniques that predate Western calculus. A snicker came from somewhere in the room. Zach leaned over to whisper something to Tyler, both of them smirking. Professor Harrington, however, looked intrigued. An unconventional approach. Have you made any headway? May hesitated. Some, she said finally, unwilling to reveal more under the weight of so many skeptical gazes. Professor Harrington seemed disappointed but moved on. Very well. Mr. Nguyen, your group is next. As the final presentations wrapped up, Professor Harrington returned to the whiteboard and wrote the original Sentinel problem in its entirety. Now that you've all shared your approaches, I'd like to discuss some historical attempts at solving this problem. Perhaps they'll inspire new directions in your work. He began explaining how mathematicians in the 1990s had approached the problem, writing out their key equations beside the original. As he wrote, May noticed an error in his transcription, a small one but significant. The mistake created a false equivalency that would lead anyone following that path to a dead end. She debated whether to point it out. Drawing attention to herself was always risky, but allowing the class to work from incorrect information seemed worse. Raising her hand tentatively, May said, Professor, I think there might be a small error in the equation you just wrote. The room fell silent. Professor Harrington turned slowly, chalk still in hand. Is that so, Ms. Lin? Please enlighten us. His tone held a challenge. May swallowed hard but continued. In the third term, the exponent should be negative, not positive. Otherwise, the relationship between the variables breaks down under transformation. Professor Harrington examined his work, then checked his notes. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. You are correct, Ms. Lin. A keen observation. He made the correction, then asked with renewed interest, How familiar are you with Zhao's work on this problem? I've read his papers, May admitted, but I found his approach too constrained by Western mathematical frameworks. Interesting critique, Professor Harrington said, studying her with new attention. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate on your alternative approach? It wasn't really a question. May felt trapped. She'd drawn exactly the spotlight she'd been avoiding. But something in Professor Harrington's genuine curiosity gave her courage. Actually, she began, her voice growing steadier. I believe I might have found a solution. The classroom erupted in whispers. Professor Harrington silenced them with a raised hand, his expression a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. A solution? To the entire problem? Yes, May said simply. That's impossible, Zach called out. No offense, but if career mathematicians couldn't solve it in 40 years, how could... Let Ms. Lin speak, Professor Harrington interrupted sharply. Well, would you share your solution with us? May nodded, gathering her courage. She stood and walked to the board, feeling every eye in the room tracking her movement. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the chalk. The key insight came from recognizing that this isn't actually a problem of finding a specific answer, but of finding the right perspective. Her hand moved across the board with surprising confidence. If we reframe the problem using a cyclical pattern approach, something my grandmother taught me years ago, the solution reveals itself. The classroom clock ticked loudly in the silence as May began writing out her solution. Her hand moved steadily, filling the board with elegant equations that flowed from one to the next, with a rhythm unlike the rigid structures most students were accustomed to seeing. 17 seconds into her explanation, Professor Harrington's expression transformed from polite skepticism to stunned recognition. By the 30-second mark, he had moved closer to the board, examining her work with intense concentration. At 1 minute, he had pulled out his phone and was taking photos of her equations. This is, he murmured, following her logic step by step. May continued for exactly 3 minutes, explaining each component of her solution with quiet precision. When she placed the chalk down, the room remained in stunned silence. Professor Harrington stared at the completed solution, then at May, then back at the board. He traced one sequence with his finger, muttering calculations to himself. Finally, he turned to face the class, his academic composure momentarily shattered. "Ms. Lin has done it," he announced, his voice barely containing his astonishment. This is a valid solution to the Sentinel problem." The silence broke as students began whispering to each other in disbelief. Some looked impressed, others skeptical, a few openly resentful. "That can't be right," Zach protested loudly. "It doesn't follow any of the standard approaches." "Precisely why it works, Mr. Thompson," Professor Harrington replied, excitement creeping into his voice. Ms. Lin approached the problem from an entirely different mathematical tradition, one that Western mathematics has largely overlooked. He turned to May. "Where did you learn this technique?" May thought of summer evenings in her grandmother's garden, of patterns drawn in dirt and explained in whispered Mandarin. "My grandmother showed me the basics when I was young. She never had formal education, but she understood patterns in a way I've never seen in textbooks." "Extraordinary," Professor Harrington breathed. "Ms. Lin, I'd like your permission to submit this solution to the Journal of Mathematical Innovation. With proper credit to you, of course." May blinked in surprise. "You want to publish my solution?" "This isn't just a homework assignment anymore," he said, gesturing to the board. "This is a significant mathematical breakthrough." As the implications of what had just happened began to sink in, the classroom door opened. Professor Wong entered, initially apologetic for interrupting, but her expression changed as she took in the equations on the board and the unusual atmosphere in the room. "What's happening here?" she asked. "History being made," Professor Harrington replied. "Ms. Lin has solved the Sentinel problem." Professor Wong's eyes darted to the board, widening as she recognized the significance of what was written there. Then she looked at May, a smile of profound pride spreading across her face. "I told you mathematics doesn't care where insight comes from," she said softly. As class ended, students filed out in unusual silence, many glancing back at May with newfound respect or curiosity. A few offered awkward congratulations. Zach and his friends left quickly, their usual confidence deflated. Lee lingered, waiting until the room had emptied except for the professors, who were still discussing May's solution. "That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen," he told her as they walked out together, the look on everyone's faces when they realized what you'd done. May felt strangely calm now that it was over. "I'm not sure it's fully sunk in yet." "Well, when it does, remember this moment," Lee said, "because everything changes now." As they stepped outside, May looked up at the sky, thinking of her grandmother and wishing she could share this moment with her. The old woman had always insisted that May had a gift, even when everyone else saw only a quiet girl who didn't quite fit in. That evening, May's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. News of her achievement had spread beyond the mathematics department. The university press office wanted an interview. The dean of sciences had scheduled a meeting. 3 different research institutions had already emailed Professor Harrington about her. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by the papers that had led to her breakthrough, May video called her parents to share the news. "Mama, Baba," she said when their faces appeared on screen, "something incredible happened today." As she explained, her mother began to cry and her father sat straighter, pride radiating from him. "Your grandmother always said you would do great things," her mother said through tears. She knew. Later, as the excitement of the day finally began to fade, May stood by her window, looking out at the campus that suddenly seemed different, a place where she belonged not despite her differences, but because of them. On her desk lay a note from Professor Harrington. "Ms. Lin, in 40 years of teaching, I have never witnessed such an elegant solution to such a complex problem. Your grandmother's wisdom, combined with your own brilliance, has opened a door that many of us didn't know existed. This is only the beginning." Professor H. May smiled to herself, thinking of all the times she had felt invisible in that classroom. 17 seconds. That's all it had taken to transform from the girl no one noticed to the woman no one would forget. Word spread quickly across Westfield University. By the following morning, May couldn't walk through campus without noticing whispers and glances following her. People who had never acknowledged her existence now smiled in recognition or pointed her out to friends. Overnight, she had transformed from invisible to infamous. "There she is," a physics student whispered loudly to his friend as May passed the science building. "The one who solved the unsolvable problem." The sudden attention was more uncomfortable than flattering. For someone who had spent years perfecting the art of blending into backgrounds, becoming the center of attention felt like being thrust onto a stage without knowing her lines. When she arrived at the mathematics department, the receptionist, who had never before looked up when May entered, immediately brightened. "Professor Harrington wants to see you in his office right away," she announced with newfound respect. May found not only Professor Harrington waiting, but also Professor Wong and Dean Chen, the head of the science division. The small office felt crowded with their presence and the weight of their expectations. "Ms. Lin," Dean Chen began, extending his hand. "I've heard remarkable things about your mathematical breakthrough." May shook his hand, trying not to show how surreal this all felt. "Thank you, sir. I've spoken with the journal editors," Professor Harrington said, unable to contain his excitement. "They're fast-tracking the publication of your solution. This kind of expedited process is almost unheard of, but given the significance of the breakthrough, we also have something else to discuss," Professor Wong added. "Several research institutions have reached out already. They're very interested in having you join their teams." "Research institutions?" Mai echoed, feeling slightly overwhelmed. "But I haven't even finished my degree." "That's actually part of what we wanted to discuss," Dean Chen said. "We'd like to offer you an accelerated path to complete your undergraduate studies this semester, with immediate enrollment in our graduate program." "With full scholarship, of course." May sat in stunned silence. Just days ago, she had been a background character in her own life, and now these respected academics were treating her like a valuable discovery. I need some time to think about it," she managed to say. "Of course," Dean Chen nodded understandingly, "but I should mention that Princeton and MIT have already expressed interest in having you transfer to their graduate programs. We'd very much like to keep you here at Westfield." As May left the meeting, her mind spun with possibilities that had never before seemed within reach. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with Lee, who was waiting in the hallway. "How was the big meeting?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Overwhelming," she admitted. "They're talking about scholarships and graduate programs and research opportunities." She shook her head in disbelief. "Yesterday I was worried about paying next month's rent." Lee smiled. "You deserve every opportunity they're offering. Your solution wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Lee spoke again. "Have you told your family?" "I called my parents last night. They're so proud they're telling everyone in the neighborhood." May smiled at the memory of her father's voice, how it had cracked with emotion. "My mother says my grandmother always knew I was special." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." May's smile faded slightly. "I just wish she could have seen this. She died when I was 14. Everything I know about mathematical patterns I learned from her." "Then she's part of this breakthrough too," Lee said quietly. "Her knowledge lives on through you." The sentiment warmed May's heart. In all the excitement, no one else had acknowledged her grandmother's role in the discovery. As they approached the university center, May spotted Zach and his friends at their usual table. For a moment she considered taking a different path to avoid them, but something had changed within her. She continued forward, her step steady. Zach noticed her approach and nudged Tyler. The group fell silent as May and Lee neared their table. "Hey," Zach said, breaking the awkward silence. "That was pretty impressive yesterday." Coming from someone who had spent months dismissing her, the words fell flat, but May nodded politely. "Thank you." "We were just discussing your solution," another student, Raj, added. "The way you approached the cyclical patterns was, well, none of us had ever considered that angle. Would you maybe want to join our study group?" Tyler asked, the invitation clearly an afterthought, a way to associate themselves with her newfound success. May looked at their expectant faces, remembering all the times they had whispered "calculator girl" behind her back, all the study sessions they had never invited her to, all the moments they had made her feel less than them. "I appreciate the offer," she said calmly, "but I'm actually forming a different study group focused on non-Western mathematical approaches. If you're genuinely interested in those perspectives, you're welcome to join." The subtle shift in power wasn't lost on anyone. Zach's smile faltered slightly. "Maybe. I'll check my schedule." As May and Lee continued walking, she felt a weight lifting that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying, the burden of seeking approval from people who had never valued her. "That was beautifully done," Lee said with admiration once they were out of earshot. May smiled. It felt good not to need their acceptance anymore. That afternoon, May received an email from the Journal of Mathematical Innovation, requesting a formal interview about her solution and background. The editor mentioned that they were particularly interested in the cultural influences on her mathematical thinking, a topic rarely explored in Western academic publications. Later that week, a reporter from the university newspaper came to interview her. The young woman seemed nervous, explaining that she usually covered campus events, not mathematical breakthroughs. So in simple terms, the reporter asked, "What makes your solution different from previous attempts?" May considered how to explain complex mathematics to someone outside the field. "Imagine trying to untie a very complicated knot," she began. "Most people would pull at the visible ends, working from outside in. But what if instead you changed your perspective and looked for the pattern within the knot itself? My approach was to recognize the internal rhythm of the problem rather than attacking it from the outside." "And this perspective came from your grandmother's teachings?" "Yes," May said, warmth filling her voice. She never had formal education, but she understood mathematical patterns intuitively. In our village in rural China, she was known for solving practical problems that stumped everyone else. She would say that numbers have their own language, and if you listen carefully, they'll tell you their secrets. The reporter looked genuinely fascinated. "That's beautiful. Do you think there are other mathematical traditions that Western academia has overlooked?" "Absolutely," May nodded emphatically. "Every culture has developed ways of understanding patterns and relationships. By limiting ourselves to one tradition, we miss so many possibilities." The resulting article, published the following Monday, focused not just on May's solution, but on her journey and cultural background. It was thoughtfully written, portraying her not as a mathematical curiosity, but as a bridge between different ways of thinking. As the article circulated, May received emails from students across campus, particularly young women and international students, thanking her for inspiring them. One message particularly touched her, from a first-year student from Nigeria who wrote, "Seeing someone like you succeed makes me believe that my different perspective might be valuable too." Professor Wong invited May to give a guest lecture in her Introduction to Mathematical Thinking class. Standing before a room of freshmen, May felt an unfamiliar confidence as she explained how different cultural approaches to pattern recognition could open new pathways in problem solving. "Mathematics isn't just about finding answers," she told the attentive students. "It's about recognizing that there are many ways to see the same problem. Sometimes the solution isn't hidden because it's too difficult. It's hidden because we're looking from the wrong angle." After class, a quiet girl with thick glasses approached May. "I'm struggling in my classes," she admitted. "Everyone else seems to understand things immediately, and I feel so behind." May recognized herself in the girl's downcast eyes and hunched shoulders. "What's your name?" "Priya," the girl replied softly. "Priya, let me tell you something my grandmother told me. Understanding comes at different paces for different minds. Some see the lightning, quick and brilliant. Others hear the thunder that follows, deeper and more resonant. Both come from the same storm." Priya's face brightened slightly. "I like that. I think I might be a thunder person." "So am I," May smiled. "And thunder people make the best mathematicians. We don't just see the patterns, we feel them." As weeks passed, May's solution gained attention beyond the university. She received invitations to speak at mathematics conferences and requests to collaborate on research projects. The Dean of Sciences created a special interdisciplinary program with May as its first student, allowing her to explore the intersection of Eastern and Western mathematical traditions. One evening, as May was preparing for a video interview with an international mathematics journal, her phone rang. It was her mother, her voice trembling with excitement. "May, you won't believe who just called us," she said. "Your father's cousin in Beijing, the one who works at the university there. Your paper has been translated into Chinese and is being studied by their mathematics department." The news struck May deeply. Her work was returning to the land of her ancestors, completing a circle that had begun with her grandmother's lessons. "There's something else," her mother continued. "They found records of a woman from our village, from your grandmother's generation. who submitted a paper on pattern theory to Beijing University in 1962. It was rejected because she had no formal education. May, they think it was your grandmother. Tears welled in May's eyes. What was the woman's name? Lin Shuying, her mother said softly. Your grandmother's name before marriage. That night, May added a dedication to her paper before its final publication. To Lin Shuying, whose wisdom transcended formal education, and whose patterns continue to reveal themselves through generations. The next morning, May received an email from Professor Harrington. A prestigious research institute was establishing a scholarship for underprivileged students in mathematics. Inspired by her story, they wanted to name it the Lin Shuying Scholarship for Mathematical Innovation and asked if she would serve on the selection committee. As she walked to class that day, May no longer noticed the whispers and glances. They had become background noise to the louder truth she now carried, that her value had never depended on others' recognition, that her difference had always been her strength, and that her grandmother's legacy now lived on not just through her, but through all those who would follow the paths they had opened together. 5 years passed like turning pages in a book, each chapter bringing new challenges and triumphs for May. Lin, the shy undergraduate who once hid in the back row, had transformed into Dr. May Lin, whose name appeared in prestigious journals and whose mathematical frameworks were taught in universities around the world. After completing her accelerated studies at Westfield, May had received offers from every top mathematics program in the country. To everyone's surprise, she had chosen to pursue her doctorate at a smaller university known for its interdisciplinary approach, where she could develop her theories connecting Eastern and Western mathematical traditions. Her doctoral dissertation had expanded on her original solution to the sentinel problem, creating an entire new branch of mathematical theory that bridged cultural approaches. Mathematicians now referred to Lin patterns when discussing certain types of cyclical problem-solving methods. On a crisp autumn morning, remarkably similar to the day she had first entered Professor Harrington's class as a student, May stood outside the mathematics building at Westfield University. The familiar stone steps and columns looked somehow smaller than she remembered, as if the building had shrunk or she had grown. Nervous? Asked Lee, now her husband, as he helped carry a box of books from their car. A little, she admitted. It feels strange being back as faculty. After completing her doctorate the previous spring, May had received offers from research institutions around the world. The most lucrative had come from a technology firm in Silicon Valley, promising vast resources and a salary that would have made her parents' financial struggles a distant memory. Instead, May had chosen to return to Westfield as the youngest department chair in the university's history, with a mission to transform the mathematics program into one that embraced diverse approaches and perspectives. You're going to change this place, Lee said confidently, setting down the box to squeeze her hand. Just like you changed me. Their paths had remained intertwined through the years. Lee had completed his own studies in computer science, developing algorithms based on May's mathematical frameworks. Their partnership extended beyond the personal into the professional, each strengthening the other's work. As they entered the building, May was greeted by a large framed photograph in the lobby, her grandmother, Lin Shuying, standing in front of her village home in China. Below the photograph was a plaque describing her as the unrecognized mathematician whose intuitive understanding of patterns laid the groundwork for breakthroughs decades later. May paused before the image, touching her fingers lightly to the frame. When the university had asked what they could do to welcome her as department chair, this was all she had requested, recognition for the woman whose wisdom had made everything possible. She would be so proud, Lee said softly. I hope so, May replied. Sometimes I still feel her guiding me. They continued to her new office, the same space once occupied by Professor Harrington before his retirement the previous year. He had personally recommended May as his successor, saying, "It's time for new patterns of thought in these old halls." The office felt cavernous compared to the tiny apartment where she had once covered walls with equations. Boxes of her books and research papers waited to be unpacked. But first, May placed 2 items on her desk: a small jade elephant that had belonged to her grandmother, and a framed copy of her first published paper with its dedication to Lin Shuying. A knock at the open door interrupted her thoughts. Dean Chen stood there looking pleased to see her. Dr. Lin, welcome back to Westfield, he said warmly.
How does it feel to have come full circle?
Like a pattern completing itself, May smiled. Thank you for supporting my vision for the department. Your proposals for curriculum changes are exactly what we need, he assured her. The board unanimously approved your plans for the Lin Shuying Scholarship for underrepresented students in mathematics. The scholarship had been May's condition for accepting the position, an annual full-ride opportunity for students from disadvantaged backgrounds or non-traditional educational paths. The first recipients would start that very semester. When do I meet them? May asked eagerly. They're gathering in the main lecture hall at 11, Dean Chen replied. 15 students, all brilliant in their own ways, and all from backgrounds rarely seen in advanced mathematics. After the dean left, May finished arranging her office, carefully unpacking books that represented her journey, textbooks from her undergraduate days, now filled with her own notes in the margins, research papers from mathematicians around the world who had built upon her theories, and most precious of all, a handwritten notebook of her grandmother's patterns, which her mother had discovered in an old trunk and sent to her. At precisely 11 o'clock, May entered the main lecture hall where 15 young faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from awe to uncertainty. They came from different countries, cultures, and circumstances. A young man from a rural Appalachian town who had taught himself calculus while working in a coal mine. A girl from Nairobi whose mathematical talents had been discovered by a visiting teacher. Twins from Mexico who had developed their own mathematical notation system to solve engineering problems in their village. Welcome to Westfield, May began, her voice carrying easily through the room she had once been too intimidated to speak in. You are here because you see patterns that others miss, because you approach problems from perspectives that traditional education often overlooks. She walked closer to them, abandoning the podium that created distance. I know what it's like to feel out of place in these halls, to wonder if your different way of thinking makes you less worthy rather than more valuable. Girl in the front row, who reminded May painfully of herself at that age, looked up with sudden hope in her eyes. Today we begin a program, unlike any other in mathematics, May continued. You won't just be learning established theories. You'll be helping to create new ones that incorporate the mathematical wisdom from your own cultural backgrounds. She gestured to the large screen behind her, which displayed photographs of mathematical systems from around the world. Incanquipunats, ancient Indian sutras, African fractal patterns, Chinese counting boards. Mathematics isn't owned by any one tradition, she told them. It's a universal language spoken with different dialects. By bringing your dialects to this conversation, you'll help mathematics itself evolve. After the orientation, May invited each student to speak with her individually in the coming days. The shy girl from the front row, Zara from a small village in Pakistan, lingered after the others had left. Dr. Lin, she said hesitantly, I read about how you solved the sentinel problem using techniques your grandmother taught you. Yes, May nodded encouragingly. In my village, my grandmother was a textile weaver, Zara continued, gaining confidence. She taught me to see mathematical patterns in her designs that helped me understand concepts my teachers couldn't explain. Everyone thought I was strange for connecting weaving to mathematics. May smiled warmly. Zara, bring your grandmother's patterns to our first meeting. I suspect there's mathematical wisdom there that deserves to be recognized. Later that afternoon, May taught her first class as a professor, the same advanced theoretical mathematics course where her own journey had begun. The lecture hall was filled beyond capacity, with students sitting in the aisles and standing along the walls. Many were there just to see the now famous Dr. Lin in action. Instead of standing behind the podium as Professor Harrington had always done, May moved among the students, making eye contact, learning names, breaking down the invisible barrier between teacher and learner. Mathematics isn't about being the fastest calculator or memorizing the most formulas, she told them. It's about seeing relationships that others miss. Some of you will see these relationships through algebra, others through geometry, others through patterns that don't yet have names in our textbooks. As the semester progressed, May's approach transformed the department. Her classes became known for their collaborative energy and creative problem-solving. Students who had struggled under traditional teaching flourished with her emphasis on multiple approaches to each problem. The Lin Shuying Scholarship students formed a tight-knit community, supporting each other while bringing their diverse perspectives to the broader university. Under May's mentorship, they began publishing papers that caught attention across the mathematical world. One evening, as May worked late in her office, she received an unexpected visitor, Professor Harrington, who had returned to campus for a board meeting. "I had to see for myself what you've done with the place," he said, looking around at the changes she'd made to his former office. Where there had once been orderly rows of journals and textbooks, there were now mathematical models from different cultures, student projects displaying unconventional approaches, and artwork depicting mathematical patterns in nature. "Do you approve?" May asked with a smile. "It's better than I could have imagined," he admitted. "I spent 40 years teaching mathematics the way it was taught to me. You've spent one semester reimagining what mathematics education could be." He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "I owe you an apology, Dr. Lin. When you first solved the Sentinel problem, I was astounded by your solution but failed to truly understand its implications. I saw it as a brilliant anomaly, rather than a sign that our entire approach needed rethinking." "We needed both approaches," May assured him. "Your rigor and my intuition, Western frameworks and Eastern patterns. The future of mathematics lies in the synthesis, not the separation." Before leaving for the night, May walked through the quiet mathematics building, now transformed by her vision. New displays showcased mathematical traditions from around the world. Classrooms had been redesigned for collaborative learning, rather than lecture-style instruction. Most significantly, the department's graduate program now attracted students from backgrounds rarely seen in advanced mathematics. In the main lobby, she paused again before her grandmother's photograph. "We did it, grandmother," she whispered. "Your patterns are changing the world." The following morning, May gave a special lecture to commemorate the publication of her latest book, Pattern Recognition: Mathematical Wisdom Across Cultures. The auditorium was filled with students, faculty, and visitors from other universities curious about the Westfield approach that was gaining international attention. As May took the stage, she placed a framed photograph on the podium, not of herself or her grandmother, but of the entire first cohort of Lin Shuying scholarship students. Their faces, bright with possibility, represented the true fulfillment of her journey. In mathematics, as in life, she began looking out at the rapt audience. The most elegant solutions often come from unexpected places, and sometimes the most powerful equation is simply believing in yourself when no one else will. A student raised her hand with a question. "Dr. Lin, when you look back at that moment in class 5 years ago, when you solved the problem in 17 seconds, did you know your life would change so dramatically?" May smiled, thinking of the quiet girl who had once feared drawing attention to herself. What changed in those 17 seconds wasn't the world's perception of me, but my perception of myself. I realized that being different wasn't my weakness, it was my greatest strength. As she continued her lecture, May glanced at the back row of the auditorium, where a shy new student was taking meticulous notes much as she had once done. The patterns continued, evolving but recognizable, connecting past to future through the elegant mathematics of human potential.